The shrill ring of my cell phone pierced through the quiet darkness of my bedroom, jolting me awake from a fitful sleep. I fumbled for the device on my nightstand, my heart already racing before I even saw the caller ID. It was 2:37 a.m., and in my line of work, late-night calls rarely brought good news. "Detective Sarah Reeves," I answered, my voice still thick with sleep. "Sarah, it's Sheriff Tom Hawkins," came the reply, the man's usually steady voice trembling slightly. "We've got a situation out at Whispering Pines. I need you here ASAP." Whispering Pines. The name sent a chill down my spine. It was a remote area just outside our small town of Millbrook, known for its dense forests and secluded cabins. As I swung my legs out of bed, my mind raced through the possibilities. A bear attack? A hunting accident? But the tremor in Tom's voice suggested something far worse. "What's going on, Tom?" I asked, already reaching for my clothes. There was a pause on the other end of the line, filled only by the sound of Tom's heavy breathing. When he spoke again, his words hit me like a punch to the gut. "It's Judge Mendonça, Sarah. He's dead, and he's not alone." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Judge Eduardo Mendonça was one of the most respected figures in our community, known for his unwavering integrity and sharp legal mind. He'd been on the bench for over 2 decades, and his rulings had shaped the very fabric of Millbrook. "Who's with him, Tom?" I asked, dreading the answer. "His secretary, Lucia Carvalho. Both of them, Sarah. Both dead." I closed my eyes, trying to process the information. Judge Mendonça and his secretary, found dead together in a remote cabin. The implications were already swirling in my mind, but I pushed them aside. Speculation wouldn't help now. I needed facts. "I'm on my way," I said, ending the call. As I dressed quickly in the dark, my mind raced through what I knew about Judge Mendonça and Lucia Carvalho. The judge was in his early 60s, married for 30 years to his college sweetheart, with 2 grown children. Lucia was in her late 20s, a recent law school graduate who'd been working for the judge for about a year. I'd met her a few times at the courthouse, bright, ambitious, with a quick smile and a sharper mind. I grabbed my badge and gun, then headed out into the cool night air. As I climbed into my car, I couldn't shake the feeling that this case was going to change everything. Little did I know just how right I was. The drive to Whispering Pines took about 40 minutes, each passing mile ratcheting up my anxiety. The moon hung low and full in the sky, casting eerie shadows across the winding road. As I drove, I couldn't help but wonder what had brought the judge and his secretary out to such a remote location. And more importantly, what had happened to them there. When I finally arrived at the scene, it was a flurry of activity. Police cruisers and an ambulance had their lights flashing, cutting through the darkness of the forest. Crime scene tape was already strung up around a small, rustic cabin set back from the dirt road. I parked my car and took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I was about to see. As I approached the cabin, Sheriff Hawkins emerged from inside, his face ashen. "Sarah," he greeted me, his voice low. It's bad in there." I nodded, pulling on a pair of latex gloves. "Walk me through it, Tom." He led me towards the cabin, speaking in hushed tones. "Anonymous 911 call came in about an hour ago. Callers said they heard gunshots coming from this direction. We dispatched a unit to check it out, and well, this is what they found." As we stepped inside the cabin, the first thing that hit me was the smell. The metallic tang of blood mixed with something else, something I couldn't quite place. The cabin was small, essentially one large room with a kitchenette in one corner and a door that I assumed led to a bathroom. But it was the center of the room that drew my attention. There, on a large bearskin rug in front of a stone fireplace, lay the bodies of Judge Eduardo Mendonça and Lucia Carvalho. They were positioned side by side, almost as if they were sleeping, except for the unmistakable signs of violence marring their bodies. I approached slowly, taking in every detail. The judge was dressed in casual clothes, jeans and a flannel shirt, so unlike his usual suit and tie. Lucia wore a simple sundress, her long dark hair fanned out beneath her. Both had apparent gunshot wounds to the chest, but something about the scene felt off. "Have you moved anything?" I asked Tom, my eyes never leaving the bodies. "No, ma'am. Everything's exactly as we found it." I crouched down, examining the victims more closely. That's when I noticed their expressions. Both the judge and Lucia wore looks of abject terror, their eyes wide and mouths frozen in silent screams. Whatever had happened here, it had terrified them in their final moments. "Tom," I said, standing up slowly, "this isn't just a double homicide. Look at their faces. Something scared them to death before they were shot." The sheriff nodded grimly. "I noticed that too. What do you think it means?" I shook my head. "I don't know yet, but I intend to find out." As I continued to survey the scene, my mind was already piecing together the beginnings of a timeline. The judge and his secretary had come out here together, to this remote cabin.
Why?
Was it a clandestine meeting? An affair? Or was there another explanation? I moved around the room, noting details. 2 wine glasses on the small dining table, a half-empty bottle of expensive red wine between them. A fire had been lit in the fireplace, though it had long since burned out. It all pointed to a romantic rendezvous, but something about that explanation didn't sit right with me. I'd known Judge Mendonça for years. He'd always struck me as a man of unwavering principles, devoted to his wife and family. The idea of him having an affair with his young secretary seemed out of character. But then again, how well do we ever really know anyone? As I continued my examination, a glint of something caught my eye near the kitchen area. I moved closer, bending down to get a better look. There, partially hidden under the edge of a small rug, was a USB drive. "Tom," I called out, "we've got a potential piece of evidence here." The sheriff came over, and I pointed out the USB drive. "Bag it," I instructed. "We'll need to get this to the tech team ASAP." As Tom carefully bagged the evidence, I couldn't shake the feeling that this small device might hold the key to unraveling this mystery. What information could be so important that it led to 2 deaths? I turned back to the bodies, my mind racing. There were so many questions. Why were they positioned like that after death? Who had made the 911 call? And most pressingly, what had terrified them so much in their final moments? As I stood there, taking in the gruesome scene before me, I felt a chill run down my spine. This case was going to be unlike anything I'd ever encountered before. Little did I know, it would lead me down a dark path, uncovering secrets that would shake our small town to its very core. I took a deep breath, centering myself. "All right, Tom," I said, turning to the sheriff. "Let's get the full team out here. I want every inch of this place processed. Whatever happened here, we're going to get to the bottom of it." As the first rays of dawn began to peek through the cabin windows, I steeled myself for the long days ahead. This was just the beginning, and I had a feeling that the horrors we'd uncovered so far were only the tip of the iceberg. As the sun began to rise, casting long shadows through the pine trees surrounding the cabin, the full investigative team arrived at Whispering Pines. The quiet forest was now alive with activity, forensic specialists in white suits meticulously combing the area, photographers documenting every detail, and uniformed officers securing the perimeter. I stood on the cabin's small porch, sipping a cup of strong black coffee, my eyes scanning the scene before me. The events of the night felt surreal in the harsh light of day, but the pit in my stomach reminded me that this was all too real. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, our county's medical examiner, arrived shortly after sunrise. I watched as she made her way towards the cabin, her face grim. "Morning, Sarah," she greeted me, her usually cheerful demeanor subdued. "Heard it's a bad one." I nodded, leading her inside. 2 victims. Judge Eduardo Mendonça and his secretary, Lucia Carvalho. Gunshot wounds to the chest. But there's something else, Elena. Something I can't quite put my finger on. As we entered, Elena's eyes immediately locked onto the bodies. She approached them slowly, her experienced gaze taking in every detail. I watched as her brow furrowed, a look of confusion crossing her face. "Sarah," she said, crouching down beside the victims. These positioning, it's not natural. They've been moved post-mortem. I felt a chill run down my spine. Moved? Are you sure? Elena nodded, pointing to subtle details I had missed. Look at the blood patterns. They don't match the current positions of the bodies. And see here. She gestured to the judge's arm. Lividity has set in, but it's inconsistent with how he's lying now. Someone positioned them like this after they died. The implications of this revelation were staggering. This wasn't just a murder, it was a carefully staged scene. But why? What message was the killer trying to send? As Elena began her preliminary examination, I turned my attention to the rest of the cabin. The forensics team had been thorough, dusting for prints and collecting trace evidence. I approached one of the technicians, a young woman named Jess. Anything stand out? I asked. Jess shook her head, looking frustrated. That's just it, detective. The place is clean. Too clean. We've found minimal prints, and what we have found likely belongs to the victims. It's like the place has been wiped down. Another piece of the puzzle, and it only made things more confusing. A crime of passion wouldn't involve such meticulous cleaning. This was looking more and more like a premeditated act. I made my way back to Elena, who was now examining the gunshot wounds more closely. What can you tell me about the shots? I asked. Elena looked up, her expression troubled. Single gunshot wound to the chest for each victim. Close range, likely from a large caliber handgun. But Sarah, these weren't the killing shots. I felt my breath catch. What do you mean? The amount of blood loss is inconsistent with these wounds being the cause of death. And look at their faces. She pointed to the frozen expressions of terror. This level of fear, I've never seen anything like it. It's as if they literally died of fright before they were shot. The implications of her words sent a shiver down my spine. What could have terrified two people so completely? And why shoot them after they were already dead? As I pondered these questions, Sheriff Hawkins approached, holding an evidence bag. Sarah, we found something you need to see. Inside the bag was a small, leather-bound notebook. Where was this? I asked, taking the bag from him. Hidden in a hollow space behind one of the kitchen cabinets, Tom replied. Looks like someone went to great lengths to conceal it. I carefully opened the bag and extracted the notebook. The pages were filled with what looked like financial records, long strings of numbers, dates, and initials. Nothing immediately jumped out at me, but my instincts told me this could be crucial evidence. Get this to the forensic accountants, I instructed Tom. I want to know what every number in this book means. As Tom left to follow my orders, I turned back to the crime scene, my mind racing. We had a staged scene, bodies moved post-mortem, victims who died of fright, and now a hidden ledger of mysterious financial records. Each new piece of evidence seemed to raise more questions than answers. I walked over to the window, looking out at the peaceful forest beyond. It seemed impossible that such a tranquil setting could be the stage for such a horrific crime. As I stood there, something caught my eye, a glint of metal in the underbrush, about 50 yards from the cabin. Without hesitation, I headed outside, making my way carefully through the dense foliage. As I got closer, I realized what I was looking at, a small security camera cleverly disguised as part of the natural surroundings. Tom, I called out, get the tech team out here now. As the team worked to retrieve the camera, my mind was already spinning with possibilities. If this camera had been operating, it could provide crucial evidence about who had come and gone from the cabin. But its very presence raised even more questions. Who had installed it? The judge? The killer? Or was there a third party involved that we hadn't even considered yet? Back inside the cabin, Elena was preparing the bodies for transport to the morgue. I'll know more after the full autopsy, she told me. But Sarah, I've got to be honest. In all my years doing this job, I've never seen anything quite like this. I nodded, understanding all too well. This case was unlike anything I'd encountered in my career, and I had a sinking feeling that we were only scratching the surface of a much larger, much darker mystery. As the bodies were finally removed from the scene, I took one last look around the cabin. In the light of day, it looked almost ordinary, a quaint retreat in the woods. But I knew that the secrets held within these walls were anything but ordinary. I stepped outside, the cool forest air filling my lungs. The tech team was still working on retrieving data from the hidden camera, and I found myself holding my breath, hoping it would give us the break we desperately needed. As I watched the flurry of activity around me, I couldn't shake the feeling that this case was going to change everything. Not just for me, but for our entire town. Little did I know just how right I was, or how deep this rabbit hole would go. I pulled out my phone, dialing a familiar number. "Chief," I said when the call connected. "We're going to need to set up a task force. This case, it's bigger than anything we've dealt with before." As I hung up, I took one last look at the cabin, now a silent witness to unimaginable horrors. Whatever had happened here, whatever dark secrets lay buried, I made a silent vow to uncover the truth, no matter where it led or who it implicated. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it a sense of foreboding. This was just the beginning, and I had a feeling that the worst was yet to come. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of activity. I had barely left the precinct, surviving on coffee and sheer determination. The task force assembled by the chief was working around the clock, following every lead, no matter how small. As I stood in front of the evidence board, my eyes scanning the photos and notes we'd accumulated, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were missing something crucial. A knock on the door pulled me from my thoughts. It was Detective Mike Lawson, my partner on this case. "Sarah, we've got something from the tech team," he said, his voice tinged with excitement. "They've managed to retrieve footage from that hidden camera." My heart raced as I followed Mike to the tech lab. Could this be the break we needed? As we entered, the lead technician, a young woman named Alicia, looked up from her computer. "Detective Reeves," she greeted me, her eyes bright despite the obvious fatigue. "You're going to want to see this." I leaned in as Alicia pulled up the footage. The camera had been positioned to capture the approach to the cabin, its view partially obscured by foliage, but still clear enough to make out figures moving towards the building. "This is from the night of the murders," Alicia explained, fast-forwarding through hours of empty forest. Suddenly, she paused. "There!" I squinted at the screen. Two figures were approaching the cabin. One I immediately recognized as Judge Mendonça, the other as Lucia Carvalho. They entered the cabin at 8:47 p.m. "Fast forward," I instructed. "Let's see who else shows up." Alicia complied, and we watched as the hours ticked by. Nothing. No one else approached the cabin. "Wait!" Mike said suddenly. "Go back. There was something." Alicia rewound the footage, and then we saw it. At 11:23 p.m., a shadow moved across the camera's field of view. It was brief, barely noticeable, but unmistakably there. "Can you enhance that?" I asked, my pulse quickening. Alicia worked her magic, zooming in and adjusting the contrast. The image was grainy, but we could make out a figure dressed entirely in black, face obscured by a hood. "That's our killer," I breathed. But how did they get in without using the front door? We continued watching. At 1:17 a.m., the hooded figure emerged from the cabin, this time clearly visible. They paused, looking directly at the camera, and my blood ran cold. The killer knew they were being recorded. "Alicia, I need you to run facial recognition on this," I said, even though I knew it was a long shot. The killer's face was mostly in shadow, but it was all we had. As Alicia got to work, I turned to Mike. "We need to go back to that cabin. There has to be another entrance we missed." An hour later, we were back at Whispering Pines. The cabin, now a silent crime scene, seemed to loom before us, holding its secrets close. Mike and I began a methodical search of the perimeter, looking for any sign of an alternative entry point. It was Mike who found it, a cellar door cleverly concealed beneath a patch of forest debris. "Sarah," he called out, "over here." We carefully opened the door, revealing a set of stairs leading down into darkness. Flashlights in hand, we descended. The cellar was small and damp, filled with the musty smell of earth and decay. But it was what we found on the far wall that made my breath catch in my throat. A door, leading to what appeared to be a narrow tunnel. "My God," Mike whispered. "Where does this lead?" We followed the tunnel, our flashlight beams cutting through the darkness. After about 100 yards, we emerged into another cellar, this one beneath a different cabin. "We need to find out who owns this property," I said, my mind racing with the implications. This wasn't just a murder, it was something far more complex. Back at the precinct, we dug into property records. The second cabin belonged to a shell company, its ownership obscured by layers of legal paperwork. But one name kept appearing in connection with the company: Senator William Hawthorne. Senator Hawthorne was a powerful figure in state politics, known for his tough-on-crime stance and his close friendship with Judge Mendonça. The connection sent a chill down my spine. What was the senator's involvement in all of this? As I pondered this new development, my phone rang. It was Elena from the medical examiner's office. "Sarah, I've completed the autopsies," she said, her voice tense. "You need to come down here right away. There's something you have to see." 20 minutes later, I stood in the sterile environment of the autopsy room, looking down at the bodies of Judge Mendonça and Lucia Carvalho. Elena stood beside me, her face grave. "I've identified the cause of death," she said. "And it's not what we thought." She pulled back the sheet covering Judge Mendonça's body, revealing his chest. "See these marks here?" She pointed to faint bruising around his heart. "This is consistent with electrocution." I felt my blood run cold. "They were electrocuted?" Elena nodded. "High voltage, directly to the heart. It would have caused immediate cardiac arrest. The gunshot wounds were inflicted post-mortem, likely to obscure the true cause of death." "But why?" I asked, my mind struggling to make sense of this new information. "Why go to such lengths?" "There's more," Elena said, moving to Lucia's body. "I found this embedded in her skin, near the electrocution site." She held up a small evidence bag containing what looked like a tiny metal disc. "What is it?" I asked, taking the bag for a closer look. "I'm not sure," Elena admitted, "but it's not like anything I've seen before. It almost looks like some kind of advanced microchip." The implications of this discovery were staggering. A hidden tunnel connecting two cabins, a powerful senator potentially involved, and now evidence of high-tech devices used in the murders. This case was quickly expanding beyond anything I had imagined. As I left the medical examiner's office, my phone buzzed with a text from Alicia in the tech lab. "Facial recognition got a partial match. You need to see this." I rushed back to the precinct, my mind whirling with questions. Who was behind these murders? What were Judge Mendonça and Lucia involved in? And how deep did this conspiracy go? As I entered the tech lab, Alicia looked up, her face pale. "Detective Reeves," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The partial match on our killer, it's a 67% match to Senator Hawthorne's son." I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. We were no longer just dealing with a double homicide. We had stumbled onto something much bigger, much more dangerous. And I had a feeling that powerful people would stop at nothing to keep their secrets buried. As I stared at the grainy image on Alicia's screen, I knew that pursuing this case could cost me everything. But I also knew I couldn't stop now. Whatever the truth was, whatever dark conspiracy we had uncovered, I was determined to see it through to the end. Little did I know, the worst was yet to come, and the truth would shake our town to its very core. The revelation about Senator Hawthorne's son sent shockwaves through our investigation. Jason Hawthorne, age 28, had been a rising star in his father's political machine, groomed for a future in politics. But as we dug deeper into his background, a more complex picture emerged. I sat in my office, poring over Jason's file. Recent photos showed a handsome young man with his father's charismatic smile, but older images told a different story. As a teenager, Jason had been arrested several times for minor offenses, all of which had been quietly swept under the rug. It seemed the senator's influence extended far beyond the political arena. A knock on my door interrupted my thoughts. It was Mike, looking grim. "Sarah, we've got a problem," he said, closing the door behind him. "The chief just got a call from the mayor. They're trying to shut down our investigation." I felt a surge of anger. "On what grounds?" Mike shook his head. "Officially, they're saying it's a matter of national security, that we're treading into federal territory. Unofficially, the senator's putting on the pressure." I stood up, my jaw set. "Well, they can try, but I'm not backing down. Not when we're this close." Just then my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "Parking garage, level B2. 30 minutes. Come alone." I showed the message to Mike, who immediately shook his head. "No way, Sarah. It's too dangerous." "It might be our only lead," I argued. "Cover for me. I'll be careful." 30 minutes later, I stood in the dimly lit parking garage, my hand resting on my concealed weapon. The sound of footsteps echoed through the concrete structure, and a figure emerged from the shadows. To my surprise, it was Lucia Carvalho's roommate, Sofia Martinez. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and she looked terrified. "Detective Reeves," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I think I know why Lucia was killed." We moved to a more secluded corner, and Sophia began to talk. Her words painted a picture far more sinister than I had imagined. "Lucia wasn't just a secretary," Sophia explained. "She was an undercover journalist. She had been working on a huge story, something about corruption in the judiciary and its ties to human trafficking." My mind raced. This could explain the hidden ledger we found, the clandestine meeting at the cabin. "Did she mention any names?" I pressed. Sophia nodded, her eyes darting around nervously. She talked about Judge Mendonça, said he was her way in, but she also mentioned others. Senator Hawthorne, Police Commissioner Davis even. She trailed off, looking more frightened than ever. "Even who, Sophia?" I urged. "Even the mayor," she whispered. The implications were staggering. If what Sophia was saying was true, we were looking at a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of our local government. "There's more," Sophia continued, reaching into her bag. She pulled out a small flash drive. "Lucia gave me this the day before it happened. She said if anything happened to her, I should give it to someone I trusted. I think you should have it." As I took the flash drive, the sound of screeching tires echoed through the garage. Headlights suddenly blinded us, and I heard car doors slamming. "Run!" I yelled to Sophia, drawing my weapon. But it was too late. For men in dark suits surrounded us, their guns trained on our heads. "Detective Reeves," one of them said, his voice cold. "You need to come with us." I weighed my options. There were too many of them, and Sophia's safety was at risk. Slowly, I lowered my weapon. "Okay," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "But she goes free. She has nothing to do with this." The man nodded, and two of his companions escorted Sophia away. As they led me to a waiting black SUV, I managed to slip the flash drive into my boot unnoticed. The drive was long and silent. I tried to memorize the route, but after numerous turns and what felt like hours, I was completely disoriented. Finally, the SUV came to a stop, as I was led into an unmarked building. My mind raced. Who were these people? Were they working for the senator, or was there an even bigger player involved? They brought me to a sparse room with nothing but a table and two chairs. As I sat down, the door opened again. My heart nearly stopped as Senator William Hawthorne himself walked in. "Detective Reeves," he said, his trademark smile nowhere to be seen. "I think it's time we had a chat about the direction of your investigation." The senator sat across from me, his piercing blue eyes studying my face. For a moment, neither of us spoke, the tension in the room palpable. "You've been asking a lot of questions, Detective," Hawthorne finally said, his voice deceptively calm. "Dangerous questions. Questions that could get a lot of people hurt." I met his gaze steadily. "I'm just trying to solve a double homicide, Senator. Or are you saying there's more to it than that?" A flicker of something, anger, fear, crossed Hawthorne's face. "What happened to Eduardo and Miss Carvalho was unfortunate, but I'm afraid you don't understand the bigger picture here." "Then enlighten me," I challenged. Hawthorne leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "There are forces at work here that you can't possibly comprehend, Detective. Powers that extend far beyond our little town. Beyond even our state. What you've stumbled upon, it's just the tip of the iceberg." A chill ran down my spine, but I kept my face impassive. "Are you threatening me, Senator?" He leaned back, that politician's smile finally making an appearance. "On the contrary, I'm trying to protect you. Walk away from this, Sarah, for your own good, and for the good of those you care about." The implied threat wasn't lost on me. Images of my family, my colleagues flashed through my mind. But then I thought of Judge Mendonça and Lucia, their faces frozen in terror. Of Sophia, risking everything to bring the truth to light. "I can't do that, Senator," I said firmly. "Whatever's going on here, whatever you and your associates are involved in, I will uncover it. And I will bring those responsible to justice." Hawthorne's smile faded, replaced by a look of cold determination. "I'm sorry you feel that way, Detective. I truly am." He stood up, straightening his impeccable suit. "I hope you understand that what happens next is on your head." As he left the room, I felt a mix of fear and resolve. I had just challenged one of the most powerful men in the state, and likely made myself a target for whatever shadowy organization he was part of. But I also knew I was on the right track. Whatever secrets that flash drive held, whatever conspiracy Lucia had uncovered, it was big enough to kill for. And I was more determined than ever to uncover the truth. As I sat in that empty room, wondering what would happen next, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The real battle was yet to come, and the stakes were higher than I could have ever imagined. I'm not sure how long I sat in that room after Senator Hawthorne left. It could have been minutes or hours. The windowless space made it impossible to track time, which I suspected was intentional. Just as I was considering my options for escape, the door opened again. To my surprise, it was Mike who walked in, his face a mixture of relief and concern. "Sarah," he said, rushing over. "Are you okay? We've been looking everywhere for you." I stood up, my legs stiff from sitting for so long. "Mike, how did you find me?" He shook his head, glancing nervously at the door. "No time to explain. We need to get out of here now." As we hurried through the corridors of the building, Mike filled me in on what had happened. After I'd gone missing, he called in every favor he had, finally getting a lead from a sympathetic FBI agent who'd been monitoring Senator Hawthorne's movements. Once outside, I blinked in the harsh sunlight. We were on the outskirts of town, in an area I didn't recognize. Mike ushered me into his car and we sped away. "We can't go back to the station," Mike said, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "It's not safe. The chief's been replaced and half the force is being reassigned. They're dismantling our entire investigation, Sarah." I felt a cold dread settling in my stomach. "They're cleaning house, removing anyone who might know too much." Mike nodded grimly. "Exactly, but we've got one advantage they don't know about." He glanced at me. "Tell me you still have that flash drive Sophia gave you." I reached down, retrieving the small device from my boot. "Right here, but we need a secure place to check what's on it." "I know just the place," Mike said, taking a sharp turn onto a back road. An hour later, we pulled up to a small cabin in the woods, far from any main roads. "My uncle's old hunting lodge," Mike explained. "No one's used it in years." Inside, the cabin was dusty but functional. Mike booted up an old laptop he'd brought, one that wasn't connected to any network. "Okay," he said, inserting the flash drive. "Let's see what Lucia uncovered that was worth killing for." As the files loaded, my heart raced. Folders upon folders of documents appeared, financial records, emails, photos, and video files. It was a treasure trove of information, all meticulously organized and annotated. "My God," I breathed, scrolling through the files. Lucia wasn't just investigating local corruption. This goes way beyond Millbrook. The documents revealed a vast network of corruption and criminal activity, stretching from our small town to the highest levels of state government and beyond. Judge Mendoza, it seemed, had been a key player, using his position to manipulate cases and protect the interests of the shadowy organization. But he wasn't alone. Senator Hawthorne, the mayor, Police Commissioner Davis, they were all implicated. The human trafficking operation Sophia had mentioned was just one part of a much larger criminal enterprise involving money laundering, drug trafficking, and even arms deals. As we dug deeper, we found evidence linking the organization to international crime syndicates and corrupt officials in other countries. The scale of it was staggering. "Sarah," Mike said, his voice tight, "look at this." He pulled up a video file. The timestamp showed it was from the night of the murders. As we watched, my blood ran cold. The video showed Judge Mendoza and Lucia in the cabin, arguing heatedly. Suddenly, the door burst open, and several masked figures entered. One of them, I realized with a start, matched the build and movement of Jason Hawthorne. What followed was difficult to watch. The intruders demanded information about files about evidence Lucia had collected. When neither the judge nor Lucia cooperated, one of the masked men pulled out a device that looked like a modified taser. I turned away as they used it on the judge and Lucia, unable to watch their final moments. When I looked back at the screen, the video showed the aftermath, the killers staging the scene, planting evidence, meticulously cleaning the cabin. "They never meant for this to be ruled a simple homicide," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. This was a message, a warning to anyone else who might think of exposing them. Mike nodded, his face pale. But they didn't count on Lucia having a backup plan. This evidence, it's enough to bring down their entire operation. Just then, we heard the crunch of tires on gravel outside. "Mike, and I exchanged alarmed looks. We hadn't told anyone where we were going. "Quick!" Mike hissed, ejecting the flash drive and powering down the laptop. Out the back. We slipped out the rear door, just as we heard the front door being kicked in. Crouching low, we made our way into the dense forest behind the cabin. As we moved deeper into the woods, the sound of shouting and gunshots erupted behind us. They knew we were here, and they were coming for us, and the evidence we carried. "We need to split up," I said to Mike, my heart pounding. "It's our best chance. You take the flash drive, get it to someone we can trust. I'll lead them away." Mike looked like he wanted to argue, but the sound of approaching footsteps made the decision for us. With a quick nod, he took the flash drive and disappeared into the underbrush. I took off in the opposite direction, making as much noise as I could. As I ran, my mind raced. Who could we trust with this information? How deep did the corruption go? One thing was clear, this was no longer just about solving a murder. We had uncovered a conspiracy that threatened the very foundations of our justice system. And now, we were the only ones who could expose the truth. As I heard the shouts of my pursuers growing closer, I steeled myself for what was to come. The next few hours would determine not just our fate, but the fate of our entire community. The final confrontation was approaching, and I knew that not everyone would make it out alive. With renewed determination, I pushed deeper into the forest. Whatever happened next, I was committed to seeing this through to the end. The truth had to come out, no matter the cost. The sound of handcuffs clicking shut around Judge Mendonca's son's wrists echoed through the interrogation room. Lucas Mendonca, a 28-year-old man who had always lived in the shadow of his renowned father, now sat before me, his face a mask of defiance and despair. "You don't understand," he said, his voice trembling with anger. "I had no choice. She was going to destroy everything." I leaned forward, my eyes fixed on his. "Then tell us, Lucas, why did you kill your father and Lucia?" For a moment, I thought he wouldn't answer. Then, like a dam breaking, the words began to flow. "My father, he wasn't the saint everyone thought he was," Lucas began, his eyes filling with tears of rage. "He was at the center of everything. Corruption, bribes, case manipulation. And me, I was his reluctant accomplice, always under threat of being disinherited if I didn't cooperate." I scribbled notes furiously as Lucas continued his confession. He described an elaborate scheme of corruption that extended from the local courthouse to the corridors of state power. Names of prominent politicians, respected businessmen, and even fellow members of the judiciary were mentioned. "And Lucia?" I asked, remembering the young journalist disguised as a secretary. Lucas's face contorted into an expression of remorse. "She figured it all out. She was too smart for her own good. When I realized she was about to expose the scheme, I panicked." He then described the fateful night at the cabin, how he confronted his father and Lucia, how the situation spiraled out of control. "I just wanted to scare them, make them stop. But then my father, he said he'd rather see me dead than let me ruin his legacy." Lucas's words painted a scene of chaos and violence. In the heat of the moment, he used a shock device he had brought to intimidate them. The result was fatal for both. After I realized what I'd done, I went into shock. I tried to make it look like a crime of passion, something that would divert suspicion from me and the truth behind it all. As Lucas spoke, I felt the weight of this revelation. This wasn't just a case of double homicide. It was the tip of an iceberg of corruption that threatened to sink the entire power structure of our city. "You understand what this means, don't you?" I asked Lucas, my voice grave. "Your confession doesn't just implicate you. We're talking about a conspiracy that goes far beyond these murders." Lucas nodded slowly, the weight of his actions finally seeming to hit him. "I know, and I'm prepared to face the consequences. But if I'm going down, I'm not going down alone." In the hours that followed, Lucas provided names, dates, locations, information that corroborated and expanded on Lucia's discoveries. It was an intricate web of corruption that stretched back decades. As I left the interrogation room, I knew this was just the beginning. Lucas's confession would be a political earthquake, toppling powerful figures and shaking public trust in our institutions. I looked at the pages of notes in my hands, feeling the weight of responsibility. The truth had finally come to light, but the price had been high. 2 lives lost, a family destroyed, and a community about to be turned upside down. As I walked to my office to begin the arduous process of unraveling this web of corruption, I couldn't help but think of Lucia. Her courageous pursuit of the truth had cost her her life, but her legacy would live on through the revelations we were about to make. The case of Judge Mendonça was officially closed, but I knew the real work was just beginning. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but the truth, however painful, needed to be revealed. And I was determined to see it through to the end, no matter the cost. I sat at my desk, staring at the mountain of evidence before me. Lucia's flash drive, now decrypted, had opened a Pandora's box of corruption. Financial records, incriminating emails, photos of clandestine meetings. It was all there, meticulously documented by the young journalist who had paid the ultimate price for her investigation. My phone buzzed incessantly as news of Lucas's arrest and subsequent confession began to spread. Reporters were clamoring for comments, politicians were issuing hasty denials, and citizens were demanding answers. The earthquake had begun, and the aftershocks were going to reshape our entire community. A knock on my office door pulled me from my thoughts. It was Mike, my partner throughout this investigation. His face was a mixture of exhaustion and determination. "Sarah," he said, closing the door behind him. "The chief wants to see us. Now." I nodded, gathering the most crucial pieces of evidence. As we walked to the chief's office, the usually bustling precinct was eerily quiet. Officers watched us pass, their faces a mix of shock, disbelief, and in some cases fear. I couldn't help but wonder how many of them were implicated in the web we were about to unravel. Chief Daniels was waiting for us, his face grave. As we entered his office, I noticed two other men I didn't recognize. One wore the unmistakable suit of an FBI agent, while the other's demeanor screamed government official. "Detective Reeves, Detective Lawson," the chief began, his voice tight. "This is Special Agent Thompson from the FBI and Mr. Callahan from the State Attorney General's office. They're here about the Mendonça case." I felt a surge of defensiveness. This was our case, our investigation. But as I looked at the evidence in my hands, I realized the magnitude of what we had uncovered was far beyond our local jurisdiction. "Detectives," Agent Thompson spoke, his voice surprisingly gentle. "We understand you've uncovered evidence of widespread corruption involving Judge Mendonça and others. We're here to help ensure this investigation proceeds without interference." The implication was clear. The people implicated in this scandal had power, influence, and a lot to lose. They would stop at nothing to bury the truth. For the next several hours, we briefed Agent Thompson and Mr. Callahan on every aspect of the case. We walked them through Lucia's meticulous investigation, Lucas's confession, and the mountain of evidence we had accumulated. With each revelation, I could see the gravity of the situation settling over them. "This goes deeper than we initially thought," Mr. Callahan said, rubbing his temples. "We're not just talking about a corrupt judge. This implicates state senators, corporate CEOs, even federal officials. Which is why we need to move quickly," Agent Thompson added. "Once word of this gets out, evidence will start disappearing, witnesses will clam up, and the whole thing could unravel." I nodded, feeling a mix of vindication and trepidation. "What's our next move?" "We're setting up a joint task force," Thompson explained. "FBI, state police, and select members of your department. We'll need to coordinate simultaneous raids and arrests to prevent any tip-offs." As they laid out the plan, I couldn't help but think of Lucia and Judge Mendonça. Their deaths had set this all in motion, a catalyst that would ultimately cleanse our community of the rot that had been festering for years. It was a high price to pay, but their sacrifice would not be in vain. Over the next few weeks, our small town became the epicenter of a political storm. The raids came swiftly and without warning. Prominent figures were led away in handcuffs, their crimes exposed for all to see. Each arrest brought new revelations, new threads to pull, unraveling the tapestry of lies and corruption that had been woven over decades. Through it all, I thought of Lucas Mendonça, the reluctant whistleblower whose actions had both ended and saved lives. He would face justice for his crimes, but his cooperation had been instrumental in bringing down the entire corrupt system. As the dust began to settle, I found myself back at Whispering Pines, standing outside the cabin where it had all begun. The crime scene tape was long gone, but the memory of that night still hung heavy in the air. Mike joined me, handing me a cup of coffee. "Penny for your thoughts, partner." I took a sip, letting the warmth spread through me. "I'm thinking about Lucia," I admitted. "About the price of truth." Mike nodded solemnly. "She knew the risks, Sarah. She died trying to expose the truth, to make our community better. And now it's up to us to finish what she started," I said, my resolve strengthening. As we stood there, watching the sun set over the pines, I knew that our work was far from over. The corruption had been exposed, but rebuilding trust in our institutions would take years. It would be a long, difficult road, but one worth traveling. The case of Judge Mendonça and Lucia Carvalho was closed, but its impact would be felt for generations to come. Their deaths had shattered the illusion of peace in our small town. But from the fragments, we had the opportunity to build something better, something truly just. As we walked back to our car, I made a silent promise to Lucia, to the judge, and to every citizen who had been betrayed by those in power. We would see this through to the end, no matter the cost. The truth had come to light, and now it was our job to ensure it was never again shrouded in darkness. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across whispering pines. As we drove away, I couldn't help but feel that this was not an end, but a beginning. A new chapter for our town, written in the indelible ink of truth and justice. And I, Detective Sarah Reeves, would make damn sure it was a story worth telling.